What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? I'm the Godless engineer, and I critically analyze apologist claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. Tonight, though, we are going to be taking a look at J. Warner Wallace, detective dipshit himself, try and establish that God doesn't make mistakes in his design, and I guess that would translate to other areas too, where we would expect a perfect creator to be generating perfect designs and things of that nature. So God doesn't make mistakes. Now, I don't exactly, I've watched the video, so I know how he goes about it, but there's a lot of different ways that apologists like to approach this kind of topic. Like, if God created everything, designed us, and created the entire universe, why do we see so many things that seem like mistakes in nature? And so J. Warner Wallace is going to do his best to attempt to answer this. And we're here for the ride. So if you want to fuck around and find out why God doesn't have to create perfect designs and that he still makes no mistakes, then please stay tuned. Ah, shit! Fuck. Walking in and seeing his face up there on the screen is a bit scary. All right, so if y'all don't know, J. Warner Wallace is a former homicide detective and cold case detective. Now he's an apologist because he was an atheist who hated religion, but then he decided to investigate religion and was convinced by their bad arguments. And so now he's a speaker and he's an apologist, he's an author, he writes a lot of books that say the same shit over and over again in different ways. He's a fucking idiot. Casey did not vote for this person, so you can't blame her. We are going to be getting into what his proof is for God not making any mistakes. So let's see what he's got.
What about if God created everything and he designed us? It would seem that the design would have to be perfect. Mm-hmm. But as it is, we're wearing glasses.
Right. So sometimes what people will do when it comes to this design argument, the pushback, I try to cover this in the book, is that, well, wait a minute, if you're saying God is the designer, then why do we see imperfection in design? And wouldn't we assume that all imperfection in design would be eliminated if God is in fact the designer? And sometimes, for example, one of the things that's offered is the Panda. The Panda's Thumb is actually a website called the Panda's Thumb that kind of makes this argument.
Now, I haven't checked out the Panda's Thumb website. So the Panda's Thumb, I believe it's a book, but it's also a website. I mean, it's not about designs being perfect. Like this is an imperfect design. It's an argument against anti-evolution apologists, which kind of seems like J. Warner Wallace finds himself in the same camp as them, because he seems to be denying that evolution, at least on the larger scale, what they call macroevolution, it's all just evolution. Like the thing I say is, evolution is evolution is evolution. Like, it doesn't matter if it's small changes or if it's big changes, it's all evolution. Of course, the small changes we could understand as adaptations, but these adaptations over time turn into big changes, and that is also evolution. But the whole Panda's Thumb thing is more an argument against the intelligent designer kind of thing, as more of a proof for evolution. The Panda's Thumb is an example of convergent evolution, is what the term is. It's convergent evolution. And that's where you have two, well, obviously they're somewhat related, depending on how far back you go, but you got these two species that independently develop certain traits. And you have the panda, who's got the Panda's Thumb, right? It's not opposable or anything like that, but it's very adept at stripping bamboo so that the panda can eat it, because that's its food supply. Well, there's another group of panda-like animals that diverged from the common ancestor that they have with the pandas that he's talking about, and they independently developed this same kind of thumb so that they could strip bamboo, because that was their primary source of food. And so this is an example of convergent evolution taking millions and millions of years, and this shows that God did not intelligently design all species as they exist now. And so that's what the Panda's Thumb is used for. It's not used as like, oh, this is an example of an imperfect design, unless you're going to say, you're going to use the fact that these pandas that exist now are a completely different species than the common ancestor they have with other animals in that particular clade. I feel like J. Warner Wallace is going to dig himself into a very deep hole pretty quickly, because he is going to try to come at this very complex topic from what his simplistic understanding is, and it can get bad really fast.
The panda's thumb is a terrible design, according to most of the skeptics, because it's not opposable.
I don't think any of the skeptics say that it's a terrible design. No, if we think of like how we normally think of thumbs, yeah, sure, it's a terrible design for an opposable thumb because it's not opposable, so that would be a terrible design. But as we understand it scientifically and from an evolutionary standpoint, the panda's thumb isn't a terrible design necessarily. It's just a natural one. It's one that developed naturally. So it wouldn't be in like what function does it provide, like the pandas. It would, the poor design would be in like, well, if it was shaped this way, then it could do its job better. Because we as skeptics, and scientifically minded skeptics at that, we understand that the panda's thumb is used to strip bamboo for food. And so it's like, well, how could this be designed better to accomplish this task? That's how it would be a bad design. But it seems like J. Warner Wallace is trying to form this in the idea that skeptics think it's a bad design because we expect all thumbs to be opposable. And that's just not how we see this particular appendage of the pandas. We understand that it has a specific purpose and a specific reason why it evolved that way. And so as far as the design goes, for the purpose that it's meant to accomplish or meant for, it seems like there probably could be a much better design if an intelligent creator actually designed that animal. That's what we're saying. We're not saying the shit that he's saying.
It seems like it's out there and it really can't do much. You can't hold anything with the panda's thumb. So the question we really have is remember one thing, as Christians, we believe in evolution of sorts.
That's broad brushing the Christian community there. Not all Christians believe in evolution, even just microevolution. Like they'll what they call microevolution. Like I said before, evolution is evolution is evolution. They call it microevolution, or better known as adaptation. Like some of them believe in that, but there are some that don't even believe in that. Like the Creation Museum, AIG, Answers in Genesis, Ken Ham, all them, they think that animals were made as they exist now. Like specifically that no speciation has occurred. Right? They believe in what they call an orchard of life. So basically, God created these basic forms that we find things in. Despite their genetic links to other organisms in different clades, he wants to say that they all started off in these very generic forms and then they deviated, right? But still staying like a cat or a dog. Wolves, I guess, would also be another fucking bush in this orchard. So that's what some people think. And these deviations are not necessarily like species, because like they would put like in the dog bush, they would have all the different kinds of dogs that we have now. And I feel like they wouldn't recognize wolves as being part of the canine family, or some of them might. I don't know. It's kind of difficult to know where a creationist is going to draw the line on these different orchard bushes. He's painting Christians with a broad brush here. Not all of them believe in evolution of a sort. They would vehemently deny that.
We do, if you think about it. We believe in change over time within the species. Look at all the diversity in this room right now. There's an incredible amount of human diversity in this room, yet all of us are, so allegedly, according to Christianity, the product of two sources, Adam and Eve, right?
And that's bullshit. Well, technically true. We in Christian theology, we are the products of two individuals at the start, but then we're also the product of 8 individuals later on. This is essentially making the case for, brother, sister, cousin fuck. I don't think that he necessarily wants to make that case, because I don't think he's from Alabama. I've got plenty of videos on my channel explaining why this is not feasible. from a population genetic stance. Like the minimum viable population for a group of organisms to survive with enough genetic diversity is the 5,500 rule, which is a very generic rule for things. But the 5,500 rule says that you need at least 50 individuals to stave off the effects of inbreeding, and then you need 500 individuals to stave off the adverse effects of genetic drift. Considering this, there's no way that Adam and Eve could have populated the world, and there's no way that 8 individuals could have repopulated the world. I don't care how much fucking you do, it's just not going to happen. Jester Lord of Fools says pandas proved intelligent design when they became asexual.
And then this another funnel point occurs at the flood, where now suddenly it's Noah and his 3 sons and their 3 wives that become the next funnel point for all of, look at all the diversity.
Okay, so right here, he's kind of explaining what he means by diversity, which is kind of what I thought that he meant by diversity, because like all humans, while we are diverse, we're not different organisms. Like we're not different species. So what he's making the case for specifically is that God created organisms as they exist, and then adaptations occurred, but they didn't change species. And so he sees God would have created a dog, or well, I guess technically at that point it'd be 2 dogs so that they could fuck. 2 dogs, and they were the same kind of dogs. God created these 2 dogs so that they could fuck and produce dogs. And then through all of the inbreeding of these 2 dogs and their offspring and everything like that, they produced this vast diversity of the types of dogs that we have now. Notice that they're still all what we consider dogs, like morphologically, what we would consider to be dogs. This isn't like, oh, there was an animal and then there's wolves, which would be a separate species, and then there's the domesticated dog that we have now. He's making the argument that God created dogs and then there's diversity that got introduced into dogs somehow will well, it's not really adaptation. Like it doesn't seem to be, because like when he talks about how there's diversity in the human race, I mean, there are adaptations, like there's certain South Pacific groups of peoples that have developed an adaptation to allow them to stay underwater longer. But that's not what he's talking about here. He's talking about morphologically, humans look different all over the world. He's not talking about, oh, well, this particular group developed an adaptation so they could stay underwater longer. This other group over here developed an adaptation so that they could survive in lower temperatures longer. That's not what he's talking about here. He's just talking about how people fucking look. That's what he's talking about. So it's like the dogs develop, which ironically the dog breeds develop through incestuous sex, through inbreeding. I guess he's not too far off from that right there. But in any case, he's making the case that the 2 dogs were created and then, just how different they look. Not that they develop different adaptations to allow them to survive in the environment that they're in. Like, one dog has a thicker fur coat so that they can live in, colder climates and everything like that. And then you got the Chihuahua, who's a nervous wreck that lives in Mexico or something. That's not what he's talking about here. He's just saying shit looks different, therefore they are different, kind of thing.
So I don't think you could take a snapshot of Adam and Eve. They would look very different than a snapshot of us today, any marriage couple today. Why? Because over time, the environment, and we've been designed with enough flexibility in our genome to adapt to our environment. Now, we're not going to adapt so much that we'll be a giraffe in 5 generations or whatever, 5 million generations. But the point is...
Well, see, that right there is a misunderstanding of evolution and what evolutionary theory says, because what he just described right there is a violation of the law of monophily. Humans can't become giraffes because giraffes are part of a completely different clade. Whatever we do eventually evolve into, we will still be considered part of the clade that we're in now. So... it's not that we're going to become giraffes or we're going to jump species or something like that. It's just that, we're going to become something different. Just like with giraffes evolved from previous common ancestors with other animals, and they just had a need to develop differently given their environment. He's describing breaking the law of monophily, which is not what evolutionists or what scientifically minded people say about the evolution of organisms.
We have enough flexibility in our genome to adapt. So sometimes when you take a picture of whatever it is today, the panda, for example, just the same way the picture of any pair of us does not give us an accurate picture of Adam and Eve, the optimal design, the original design, before entropy and environment and all the other stuff plays on the species, that would not be an accurate picture of Adam and Eve.
Now, I agree that when Homo sapiens first developed out of our common ancestor, I would definitely agree that if you took a snapshot of what they look like and a snapshot of a modern human individual, you could tell a difference. But they're still the same species. We're not morphologically all that different. Although, we do have differences depending on where, people are located in the world. And so we've gone through adaptation in that kind of sense. But I feel like what he's saying here is that there's a limitation on how much an organism can change, or at least that seems to be the implication of it, because an organism to him arbitrarily is constrained by their species. So like a human will always be considered a human and it will never change species, when in reality there is the possibility of us changing species at some point in our future history. Just like for any other organism in the past, there's, they could change enough to be considered a different species. The best example that you can give, counterexample to what he's saying, is ring species, because the ring species starts out with a common ancestor, and then this common ancestor group splits off into two different directions. And there's different environments in each direction, and so the organisms over time, they change enough by the time that they meet up again sometime in the future. Each group has changed enough to where they can't reproduce with one another. What that seems to indicate is that there's not really a limit on how much an organism can change. I mean, bigger changes will of course take longer and longer amounts of time, but I mean, like the land organisms that we have today, they all developed out of a common ancestor that crawled out of the ocean, however many billions of years ago, or millions of years, billions of years ago. Tiktaalik is that alligator-looking kind of thing, and it's the first species that we've got record of that made its way onto land. Everything developed out of that. Like all the land animals and everything like that, they developed out of that. And even some land animals went back to the ocean, as is the case for dolphins and whales. You have to understand that there's no limit to how much a group of organisms can change over long periods of time. But what J. Warner Wallace is trying to get you to believe is that there is a limit, and that's just not true.
And today's panda is not an accurate picture of what may have been the first panda anymore.
My question is, and I know I stopped it really quick, but my question is, and maybe you guys can think about this as we continue on, why would God create something like organisms that could be shaped and influenced by things that seem to be outside of his control? Because like he's making the case that the environment and all these other things shaped how these organisms look or operate. And so he's trying to make the case that the original panda doesn't look like the pandas that we have now. They just look different, but they're still pandas, right? My question is, why would God create a system that is malleable at all? Why would he create organisms that can change? Why would he not make the most optimal organism for whatever area he's putting them in on the earth? Why wouldn't he do that? Why is it that these organisms change as their environments change? Why wouldn't he just create organisms that fit perfectly into the environment that he fucking put them in? Oh, because God's not real, honey? That makes a lot of sense on all of this, more so than fucking what he's putting down.
Because we know that over time, the environment does have an effect. And we are in a fallen world. We would expect that under Christianity.
Just to catch you up, the reason why God's design isn't perfect or isn't perfectly optimized for the environment that the organisms live in is because a woman ate from the wrong tree. She was told not to, and she fucked up genetics for everybody.
She also fucked up childbirth for everybody.
She fucked up childbirth too, that's right. Casey, I don't know if y'all can hear Casey, but she goes, stupid bitch. So a woman ate fruit from a tree, and that caused a molecular change in all organisms.
I think they give Eve too much credit.
At the heart of this, what it requires is magic. Like, I would totally expect this kind of logic out of, like, Once Upon a Time. You know, the TV show Once Upon a Time? Like, this sounds like the kind of ridiculous shit that you would find in a fairy tale. I'm not saying that Christianity is a fairy tale. I'm just saying that this is the kind of magical thinking that would make sense in a world where magic is real.
So in the end, we end up, number one, making the mistake of saying, well, your eyeball, the way it is today, was part of the optimal design. Well, how do you know that? How could you ever know that?
Well, I think the better question would be, why would God create an imperfect design? And of course, he's going to say, well, God didn't create an imperfect design. It was man who decided to fuck up and change God's design. Casey goes, fucking rude. That further begs the question of, why would God create a design that can be changed? Also, is God not powerful enough to create something that is impervious to change from lower beings like humans? Like, I feel like he's not doing his theology any kind of favors by suggesting this, because he's sitting there and he's like trying to spin this kind of story. He's like this. All right, now listen, I know God created everything, right? But he made it in a way to where eating from the wrong tree that they didn't know it was wrong to eat from, they were just told, don't eat from this tree. They didn't know that it was wrong to eat from this tree, but they ate from it anyways, and that fucked up their genetics, and so therefore now nature can affect their genomes. Okay, like they go through adaptation and everything like that. If they hadn't have eaten from it, it would have been fine. We would have been a perfectly designed creature. But since they ate fucking fruit, we got fucked up. Also, I don't know if you guys have noticed yet, but keep a watch on J. Warner Wallace's waist. On this side, like, of him, his right, my right, it would be y'all's left, I believe. He's got a badge. He's a retired detective. Most of the time, retired detectives, as we found on the internet and stuff, most of the time, you know, they keep their badges in a shadow box, you know, to display. And then on occasion, police chiefs can issue special badges for retired police officers that indicate that they are retired. But I feel like he wears a police badge as part of his costume, because he's got this whole persona of, like, I'm a retired homicide detective and cold case detective. And so, like, part of his costume is this badge. And I feel like it's kind of ridiculous that he wears it to all these things, but it's whatever. I mean, I fucking wear costumes too.
That's a kind of an assumption, isn't it? Also, the next thing is, well, how do you know what it is that God had designed this thing for? Yeah, you're right. That the Panda cannot hold a bottle of water or a Monster drink, which I like to drink in the afternoons. Okay, I'll just be honest. Energy drinks. A panda cannot hold an energy drink, given that panda's thumb is not opposable. But that's not what the panda is supposed to do with that hand. If the panda is supposed to use that hand to strip bamboo, which is his primary source of food, that's an excellent thumb.
I know I'm interrupting him in the midst of all of this. That is not what scientifically minded people, I keep wanting to use their words, evolutionist, but just reasonably minded scientific people that accept evolution for the fact that that is simply not the case that we make. Like, that's not what people make. People don't say, oh, well, why can't a panda chug a Four Loko and go fucking nuts in the middle of a jungle? Like, that's not the case that we make. The case that we would be making, if it is a bad design, which more than likely, given that nature is the one that shaped the panda's thumb, there are improvements that could be made that would allow the panda to strip bamboo better in some kind of way, either faster or more efficiently or something like that. Like, there's improvements that can be made if an intelligent designer did it. But of course, J. Warner Wallace is saying, hey, maybe this isn't the optimal design. Maybe adaptation took over and changed the panda bear to have this kind of thumb. Or maybe he's saying, well, we don't know what these design features are meant to fulfill, so therefore we just have to figure out what they're designed for. Casey says said, to be fair, J. Warner Wallace wouldn't know intelligence if it slapped him in his face. I'm guessing it was a dick slap. I feel like that's a better question for J. Warner Wallace to acknowledge here than, like, what about his fucking thumbs? I don't care about his fucking thumbs there, J. Warner Wallace. What I care about is, why did God make pandas somewhat suicidal by causing them to just hurl themselves around the place and be like little crash test dummies all over the wood? Because you would think that, oh, that's not something that I need to design into these little shits. But apparently they went fucking nuts when Eve ate from the tree of knowledge, and they were like, oh shit from the tree of knowledge, time to yeet ourselves off of this planet.
Pandas are naturally like on bath salts.
It does exactly what it ought to do. So in other words, we kind of import what we expect God to be trying to achieve, and that may not be what God's trying to achieve anyway. And then we also assume that whatever form we have today was the optimal original design, which isn't necessarily the case.
Let me get this straight. Let me see if I understand his argument here. Maybe I'm misunderstanding something. Maybe people in the chat right now can kind of correct me on my understanding of what he is saying here. He's saying that, like, apparently nature made the panda's thumbs worse in respects for drinking Four Locos, but better to strip, bamboo, strip bamboo so that they can eat it. But that's obviously not the optimal design, and he's saying, I guess the optimal design for the panda's hand is that it's just a full opposable thumb, and that pandas were just like furry fat people. I mean, like, pandas were furry fat people, and then nature fucked them up and took away their opposable thumbs so that they could just eat bamboo. I've never tried to eat bamboo, but we've got a bamboo plant down below, and I got to tell you, I'm not really looking to eat the bamboo from that. So that's me importing my modern sense of shit onto things, I guess. Like he was saying.
Can I make stir fry or something? I'll get bamboo shoots and you can eat bamboo.
So that's what he's saying. He's saying that, I feel like what he's saying is that pandas were actually small, furry, fat people that eventually were changed by their environment and removed their opposable thumbs so that they could, eat bamboo more efficiently, which is not scientifically is not how we would analyze this. We would wonder, why on earth would God create pandas and, create them with such horrible designs for, eating their main food source, bamboo? Why wouldn't he make certain improvements so that they would be more efficient at it in one way or another? Like, that's the argument that we would make, not this whole shit of like, well, we don't know what the original design was. We just know how they exist now. And we don't need to try to assume that pandas want to drink Four Locos all the time. Maybe they just want to gnaw on some bamboo shit.
So do I hear you say that you can't really talk about perfect design per se, but we're talking about optimal design.
Optimal design, yes.
Right.
And every time any design, I can tell you that I used to have a slide where I would show my master's thesis was a law and fire facility in Santa Barbara. That was my graduate work.
Good for you. The whole optimal design discussion here is he's saying that we can't know what the optimal design originally was. We just know what the design, I guess, or the result of the design now with the effects of the environment and Eve's bad decisions. That's what he's saying. And so this optimal design, I guess, would be the fully opposable thumbs for the pandas. But there were still pandas, and they were still crazy as shit sniffing bath salts. They just had opposable thumbs, maybe. But it kind of seems like he's sort of moving the goalposts here. Because as far as like evolution goes and unguided evolution, which is what would be the response here to the shit that J. Warner Wallace is saying, is, the panda's thumb and this thumb that's developed in multiple species, it's shaped by nature to do a job, bamboo stripping, and it does it well enough to where it accomplishes the task. There are probably improvements that can be done that would improve the efficiency of stripping the bamboo so that they could eat it. But as far as nature goes, it evolved the way that it did. That's just how they developed. This takes place over millions and millions of years. This is the actual scientific view of that, not the shit that he is saying.
We designed this huge building that was a whole city block long. And man, I wanted certain design features that I really wanted because it would line up certain towers certain way on the building. But because I knew I had to accomplish certain design features, I had to make modifications to get the optimal design, which was always an act of compromise. I'm here to tell you, if you've ever designed, design is a continual act of compromise to achieve the optimal design in which one feature is always being compromised for the benefit of some other thing you're trying to achieve.
Now, from a human perspective, I would agree totally that would be the design process of constant compromise on, we need to do this, so we can't do that. But the thing is that when you're designing something, you have a specific goal in mind, and you want to optimally design whatever you're building to achieve that goal. So, like, for instance, sharks need fins and need the ability to do all the things that they do in the water. It's not an optimal design to put freaking lasers on their heads, right? That would be an extreme example of this compromise that J. Warner Wallace is talking about. Like, God, in his infinite wisdom, compromised and said, well, sharks, what they really need is this kind of skin right here, these fins, the massive jaws and everything like that. But it doesn't really work for lasers to be on their heads, so I'm going to have to compromise because I really want laser sharks rather than just regular old sharks because lasers are fucking cool. So I'll have to compromise and not put lasers on the shark's head. I feel like that's an extreme example, but it is an example of what he's talking about here in God compromising for stuff. Because when I'm designing something, or I'm coming up with a design for something, I'm not thinking, well, I have to compromise like adding this thing that doesn't help me attain my goal versus this thing over here. And how this relates back to the whole panda thing is that if God were to design the panda the way that the panda eats and the environment that it lives in and its primary food source, why would he not design the panda with the thumb that it has now? It kind of seemed like J. Warner Wallace was supposing, well, we don't know what the original panda was. It could have had opposable thumbs, drank 4 Locos, sniffed bath salts, and then somersaulted off cliffs. We don't know if that was the panda or if it was something else, like more optimal. But considering that we only find pandas in areas where bamboo is their primary food source, it seems to me like God would design them with that fucked up thumb to be able to strip the bamboo. But considering that you could make improvements to it to make it do its job better, why didn't God design it that way? Why didn't God design the panda's thumb to do the job better than it actually does? Like this panda's thumb, it scrapes off like 100% of all the edible shit off this bamboo. It does its job perfectly. Why couldn't God do that if he's all powerful? Also, why did God make such a fucked up system? How genes copy and split and all this other stuff? Like, why did he make that so prone to genetic mutation? Why did God make his creations so prone to modification by the environment and other factors? Like, why did he do any of this shit? Like, these are the questions that should be analyzed here, not this bullshit that J. Warner Wallace is coming at us with.
That is just the nature of design. Because it's the base nature of design, you can't violate it. This is the case with us too. So to say that it's perfect, well, what do you really mean by perfect? What you really mean is optimal, and then that's the art of compromise. That's just the nature of design.
So, for example, your laptop, which was here just a minute ago, it's portable, but it doesn't have the kind of computing power of, say, the NASA supercomputer.
Right.
But NASA's supercomputer is way too big to carry around, but it has lots of horsepower.
Sure.
So it's a bit of a give and take.
And you know that even when you try to design anything on your own.
The phones that you are either watching this stream on or carry around you all the time are vastly more powerful than the computers at NASA back in the 60s and the 70s. Okay? Like, that's just the nature of technology. Like, it gets more advanced and it gets more powerful. And those things were intelligent intelligently designed, but they were intelligently designed by limited intelligent beings. But so what we're talking about is this vast intelligence that knows everything, that knows the perfect design. He knows how to create a phone that will never run out of space, or seemingly never run out of space. He knows that design, but yet he chooses to make an inferior design. I mean, imagine that. Putting it into the analogy that this guy is presenting here, it would be a lot like a NASA engineer or computer engineer or whatever in the 60s making the conscious decision to make an inferior product when he could make the perfect product. He could make the perfect phone. He could make the perfect computer, but he chooses not to. He chooses instead to make this inferior design. Why does that happen? Why does that seem to happen? That is the question that should be answered here. Not, well, we don't really know what was originally done. It's like, we know what was originally done in the case of computers. Like, and just because we don't know the original, design that God came up with, doesn't mean that there's not flaws in his quote unquote designs now, or whatever proposed perfect or optimal design God came up with, there weren't better design options available. I feel like he's not addressing the actual problem here, but I mean, that's all apologists.
And if you ever try to build something, you're always compromising either something you're trying to, it's cost, or it's you're doing 5 of these, it's expediency, it's whatever it may be, but it's really about the optimal design in that environment, which is not going to be perfect in some other environment. So I think these are the kinds of choices we typically think, well, couldn't God just make all, well, look, God, I guess you could say God could do a lot of things. God could actually make it so you never have to make a free choice to accept him. You can immediately be born with belief. But what if God's actually trying to achieve something in you based on the way he's designed us? What if he's trying to achieve something in the freedom we have, their freedom to make mistakes, their freedom to actually mess up our environment and create some bad designs 5 generations down the road, right?
This just sounds like a toxic kind of fuckhead here, because it's like, I could create this thing right here to just automatically love me no matter what, but I really want it to love me for me, not because I told it to. So, I mean, I think I'm going to build a whole bunch of guilt and everything into a religion and force them in that way to love me, because it's like,
Fear.
Through fear, because it's like, love me or burn in fucking hell, you bitch. That's the way that I want you to love me. I want you to love me because the alternative is fucking hell, literally. I don't understand why this seems like a good thing to him, because it's like God created us with free will so that we can make the free will choice to love him or burn in hell. That's not a reasonable decision to make right there, because it's like you're being lined up. And it's like, do you believe in God? It's either you believe in God or you die right now. And they got a gun up to your head, and it's like, which decision are you going to make? It's just so fucking ridiculous.
Because of how we live in our environment. But there's some benefit to us that exceeds the impact on design. So I think it's just impossible to kind of play that game where you think you know the mind of God, number one. You think you know what's perfect versus optimal, number 2, and you think you have the actual creature you're examining and evaluating, that this eyeball was the same design as the optimal eyeball in Adam.
What we actually know scientifically, as far as the eyeball goes, is that the eyeball slowly developed over millions and millions of years. We have just about every single form that the eyeball has taken extant in animals today, and we can clearly map out a path of light-sensitive cells in an organism, and then all of those light-sensitive cells collecting into one area, and then eventually moving into this concave sort of eyeball lens sort of structure. So we can map that out evolution through the evolutionary timeline, it developing that way. So has there ever been a perfect eyeball ever designed? It depends on what the need for it was. Like, do these single-celled organisms or these simple multicellular organisms, do they need 20/20 vision, or do they just need the ability to detect where light is and where light isn't? It depends on the environment that they exist within. Eagles Eagles, they have amazing sight. They can see, fucking in the water. They can grab fish as they're swimming for their lives and everything like that. Is that the optimal thing for like humans and how we operate? Like, is there any need for a human to be in New York City and be able to spy on somebody in like New Jersey? Like, is there any need for that? It depends on you. If your job is a voyeur, maybe. But my point is that, I don't think that there's any one perfect design for any particular environment. I just think that some adaptations allow organisms to survive in their environment better than other organisms. That's the point that J. Warner Wallace isn't getting, is that everything that he's arguing for here, as far as like adaptations and non-optimal designs and all this other stuff, like this is indicative of a natural evolution, not of an intelligent designer. But he goes the complete opposite direction and says, intelligent designer alert, because obviously God had to design this shit because he has a purpose in mind. And don't even fret about all the genetic diseases. Like, I don't understand what the optimal design, goal would be for bone cancer in general, let alone in children. Or what's the optimal design in having a baby born addicted to meth? What is God trying to accomplish with that? Why would God design a system that would that would have those things be a cause? Under naturalism, we understand why those things happen. We understand why babies are born addicted to certain drugs. We understand why cleft lips form and all this other stuff. We understand all those things. My question is, why would God design a system that would allow those things to happen? If God is this magical designer, he would be able to design things in a way to where the poor decisions of the mother to be on all these drugs or whatnot while she's pregnant, it wouldn't transfer to the child. Under a naturalistic perspective, we understand why that happens. But under this magical God concept, I don't understand why God would design it so that the baby would be born addicted, God is the ultimate designer in J. Warner Wallace's view here. And I get that it may not seem on the surface to be a fair comparison because it's not like God designed the child to be, addicted to meth, depending on how you interpret the Bible, because there are certain Bible verses where apparently God stitches us together in the womb. So it kind of seems like God has some kind of control over how we're born and all this other shit. But my point is that God has obviously designed this system where these things happen. And I would think that if you're the perfect designer, just like that NASA scientist or that computer engineer could develop the perfect system that would not result in computers that can get infected by viruses. But he designs computers that can be infected by viruses. I don't understand that particular design decision there. Well, that's going to be it for our stream tonight. So before you head out, smash that button if you've made it this far. And while you're down there, why don't you consider subscribing if you like this kind of live stream. But in any case, I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. Don't forget to stand up, use your voice, and all that kind of good shit. Bye, heathens.